Hello and welcome back from the lunch break, everyone. I hope you had some time to get up, walk around, find some food, maybe some coffee. We'll be spending now the next 1.5 hours on our next lesson called social coding. And we have already met this morning, but in case we haven't, hi, I'm Samantha. I work as a research software engineer at CSC in Finland. And with me here today is Jarno. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jarno?
Yeah. Hi. Well, I'm Jarno. I'm a research software engineer at Aalto University, and I think that's sufficient.
Okay. Yes. So we'll be talking about social coding and open software, or what you can do to get credit for your code and to allow reuse. And this is, again, as in the morning as well, a well, not even demo-based, but very discussion-heavy section of the material. So there will be no exercises to do directly on your computer, meaning you also don't have any computational prerequisites for this lesson. So we'll be discussing around the topics, and there will be quite some questions for you also coming up in the collaborative notes. So maybe, Jarno, we can show briefly for everyone who joined us now how the notes work. So you got the link to the notes with any of the last emails that you got from us if you're registered for this event. And if you go there, it looks something like what Jarno is showing right now. And then you can see there's already a question being answered here. So how would I go about answering this question as well, Jarno?
Yeah. So if you have this document open, actually you will probably be at the top if you go to the link. So you can scroll down past the break, past the lunch break, and here is the social coding section. And then I have this pen button here that will go to editing mode. So this is the same document viewed it differently. So now I have to go past the lunch section again. So now this is the lunch section, this info section. And here we have social coding. So yeah, you can read the question and vote for any specific topic or vote for the answer by adding a character. So add an O character. I just added one here. If I think it's a good reason to share my script's code or data, if I think that to find and make it easier to find and reproduce is a good answer, then I'll press O here to add one vote. And so, yeah, this is kind of, this is nice because you can read the vote counts essentially from even from this text-based editing mode. I'll remove my own vote from there. I guess I could go through them and vote, but maybe not yet.
We'll get back
I
to
will
this.
zoom out though a little bit. So you might have this view instead, where you have these three buttons. So the edit mode is the pen, and the eye is the view mode, I guess, preview. Should we stay in the preview mode? Why not?
Yes, let's stay in the preview mode.
And now I will try to zoom back in and not out. Okay.
Okay, let's give people still a moment to answer and talk a little bit about why we have this lesson, which might sound a little bit dry maybe to come here. And so why do we talk about software licensing and stuff around that? So imagine a situation when you are out there in the internet and you find some really great code or data that you really want to use or reuse for your own purposes, for your own research, for another publication that you might be preparing. So you want to do something good for the original author, you want to cite them, and you will make their work also more visible. You might need to modify the code a little bit to make it useful for yourself. Or if you're using like data that you're finding out there, you might want to remix it with your own data. But then everything is nice and you're very happy that you found this code or this data, it makes a lot of sense for you to reuse it. But then you realize that there is maybe no license attached to the code. And now you really have this situation where you are there, okay, you have used it, you have done something with it, it solves an issue, but then no license means you have no idea what the original author allows you or agrees with you what you can do with that. So basically, you cannot reuse what they have provided there. And then it can be, okay, you choose to publish the paper, but you don't publish the software data because you can't. Meaning also that others that find your paper cannot actually build on top of your software, on top of your data. Or you maybe cannot publish it at all because your journal requires that the paper should come with the data and the software so that they are reproducible. And this lesson is all about avoiding this situation for you and for others. So like if you take something from this lesson, it's about like when you find something on the internet, look at it if it has a license and what it allows you to do. Okay, so let's go into the notes and see what we have there. So we have 4 questions to start with. The first is about why would I want to share my script's code and data? And there is a few options that you hopefully had time now to read through. And I see that many have already voted here. Maybe very interesting is that age didn't get any votes yet, discouraging competitors. So you're all
That is
very
interesting.
good sinned here. So you want
either it is that people don't believe it discourages competitors, or so it kind of doesn't count as publishing something in the sense that someone else could still publish it as a scientific contribution. Or it means that people are just fine with sharing their stuff and collaborating with people, which would be, of course, the positive view of this lack of votes. I kind of suspect it is the other one, though.
How
we'll see.
about you, Jarno? What would be a good reason, or what is a good reason for you to?
So what am I thinking when
script?
I basically do try to share everything from as early as possible, and originally, basically the main reason was that I didn't want to lose access to my code when I moved to another research group. So essentially, if you work for a university, in many cases, the university owns the license, but they do allow you to publish it as an open source library. And then if you move to another university, hopefully you brought a copy, but even if you did, if it doesn't have a license, it's kind of legally dubious to use the code. So you can use it in your new institution if if it's a work product, you did it for work, if you publish it with a license, or at least like add a license file for yourself. So that is one big reason. And then the other one is just if you have it online, and then when your computer crashes, which it will, then you still have access to it. For that, of course, it could be private, but then including the other reason, not losing access to your own code, making it public is more useful. Well, the third thing is, of course, it is to actually try to share the research contribution so that other people can use it and don't have to redo all the work. So like that is the altruistic reason, but the first two are more about why I'm why I'm for myself sharing the code.
For me, it's also here answer okay. It encourages me to code
That is
properly
true.
from the
Yeah.
start, because for myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I will remember, and oh yeah, like it's clear to me now
Yeah.
what's happening here, and I don't need comments, I don't need anything. But when
And I
I
will
then
add
think about, okay,
documentation at some point, and I will add tests at some point, and it will be fine. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But if you're working up in the open, then it can happen that someone finds your code, and I want to make that someone happy. I
Yeah.
work that way. I want to make other people happy. So I will add a little bit documentation at least, and I will also add comments from the start to make that random person that finds my code happy. And then again, when I come back like 2 months after I wrote that code, I will also be happy myself to find the information there. Okay. Then let's see question
Okay.
2. The most
Okay.
concerning thing for me if I share my software now. So if you're not sharing, what's your reason? Or if you're sharing, what are the things that you're concerned about? How it is for you? Yeah.
Mm. It's encouraging that there's a lot fewer votes here. But yeah, I mean, actually, it is the ugly code answer, because if I'm not sharing something, it is because I'm essentially just trying something out that is probably not going to work, and then it's abandoned way. I'm not going to finish it, most likely.
Yes. And for so ugly code, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a big reason. And I have some codes that are still private, where I'm thinking like someday I will clean this up for someone else to use.
Yeah.
And then there is this, others may find bugs and mistakes. What if the algorithm is wrong? Yeah, what if is the algorithm is wrong? If you don't share, no one might ever find out. That's maybe good for you because you have that paper published, but in the end, don't you want to know? Like, isn't it better if someone says, okay, like I've looked at your code, and how about this? Is there some mistake here? And then you can still fix it. And then if you have already published your code, then you can publish a, what is it, addition to the paper, or in any other way
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah, you
And
can
then
fix
when
it.
people reuse it, they have a working code, and they actually have something to reuse.
Somehow, like, this is maybe not always the case. But if you have a decent number of publications, and some of them have errata, some of them have corrections, or you even have pulled back. What's the official? What's the correct English word for removing an article? Like, it's kind of a drastic thing to do. Usually, you would make a correction, but like, if you retracted an article, like, that should make you look better. That should make all of the other papers look so much more believable, because mistakes happen. And yeah, I know I've lost some data. I know I've changed the code and not been able to reproduce a result and so on. So yeah, those kinds of things happen. And if your publication history looks like you've never made a mistake, like, to me, that's more suspicious than polished look, right?
Yes.
But that's not still always the case, right? It is better to make sure that you don't have mistakes in the paper before you publish it. For that, publishing the code before you publish the paper is actually a good idea.
Yeah. And there is even journals that support that also. And then we have A, it will be scooped or stolen by someone else. And I think that's where we get to one of the topics that we will be talking in this lesson, which is licenses can actually help with that, because you are sharing your code, and depending on like who owns the right, is it you or is it your employer, you can put the license and give the framework on how how your code can be reused in different scenarios. And that's what the license is for. It's also to protect you and your work and make clear how it can be used in the future.
Yeah. This is also a big difference between how software is treated and how papers are treated. So when you're doing research and you publish a paper, like, I've never heard anyone say you shouldn't I don't want to publish this paper, because then someone might create derivative work based on it. Like someone might scoop it and like continue working on that field, because they will cite your paper, and if they don't, that's misconduct. Now, if they use your code and they don't cite you, that's also, I mean, it's not exactly citing, right? It's not technically the same thing. But if they don't mention that they have used your code, that is also misconduct. Unless, of course, you publish it under a license where you specifically say you can do whatever you want with this code. Those licenses do exist, but you don't have to use that license. So.
Yeah. And then point H also has quite a few votes here. It is too early. I'm just prototyping and I will write version to distribute
That was my
later.
answer also.
I mentioned also earlier, I'm also guilty of that. I definitely have some of those lingering around.
Yeah. And there is like, we all know the expression, well, I don't know the expression, like positive publication bias. So is it just publication bias? I guess it is. So people publish positive findings and they do a lot of work on a research project, don't get a positive finding, and then it doesn't get published. Then the same thing happens with code. You do a bunch of stuff, you try different things, and you never publish the ones that don't work. So it actually would be useful to publish the codes where you give up. Not necessarily to give it to people to reuse, but rather to just tell people you've already tried this. Maybe they can do it better, but it's evidence. Maybe it doesn't work.
Yeah, and it might spark ideas for someone else to
Yeah.
continue your work. And maybe that is something that in the end also helps you.
Yeah.
And then we have I worried about licensing and legal matters as they're very complicated. And yeah, I also have felt that way. And it is a big topic, and there is many different licenses and so on. But hopefully with this lesson today, we can also show you that there are tools out there that help you, and like maybe showing you a way on how you can still do it even though you don't know the whole context of everything.
Yeah.
And still work with the licenses.
And there is also and I guess this comes out in the licensing section as well. But like one important point is that common sense works here. So even though it is a legal thing, it's not just a bunch of magic words that somehow interact with some legal system out there. It's mostly legal stuff is based on common sense. So if you put a license there and it's one of the standard ones, people should roughly know what you mean by it. So it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yep. There's also a comment on I put it in Jupyter notebook format, which isn't suitable for anyone to reuse it and never having time to update it. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, we'll come back to publishing notebooks, so that might be useful. What do we call that section? Jupyter notebooks. And I guess we have binder in the Jupyter notebooks section, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so that will be useful in that case. But yeah, I mean, you can publish Jupyter notebooks. You can put them online. It's not, maybe it's not as reusable, but it's better than not publishing it.
Yeah, and there's even platforms where you can have them as executable notebooks.
Yeah.
So you don't even just provide your code, but you can provide the whole computing environment. Often they live also in containers, what we talked about earlier today. so that someone could just go to this platform, click a button to start a whole computing environment with all the libraries already set up for them and run your code in that environment. So
Yeah.
there is definitely ways for doing that too.
Yeah.
Okay, question 3. Why is software often treated differently from papers? Have you experienced that, Jarno?
So, I mean, yes, it's getting better, or at least I think it's getting better. But I'm also now a research software engineer. I interact with software way more than when I was a researcher, although even then I was basically doing the same job. I was also publishing papers. And I think that at that time, it just, at least in my field, it wasn't even normal to publish your code. And that has at least changed. So it is getting better.
I also have a feeling there is now more journals that at least suggest to also publish code and data. Some may even require it, but the focus still seems on the papers themselves.
Yeah. This is
And
partly
yep.
like just an answer or a possible solution to that. Someone will scoop my code and or scoop my research and publish before me. Like if they were forced to publish the code, then everybody would of course see that that they have used your code. So like, in that sense, this is a root of some of these problems.
Mm. And here's also mentioned maintenance isn't funded. Like just putting it out there is often also not the end of the line, but it's still a good step to do, even if you don't have time to maintain it. Because like in the previous example, it might still spark ideas, or someone might find this so useful that they actually take over the maintenance of your code. That can also happen.
So it can be the end of the line. And I have published software that I used for 1 or 2 papers, never got back to it, and they're just now, like, I haven't maintained them in 5, 6 years. And that's like nobody's losing anything because I don't maintain them. If I was still using them, I would maintain them. And if somebody else has used a part of it, then that's nice. But yeah, I mean, you don't lose anything by not maintaining the code that you publish.
Yeah. And I think also nowadays, I don't know if people here in the audience have heard about research software engineers before, but it's a coming thing to the world, let's say in UK and US, maybe already a bit, or definitely a bit more known, but it's also coming to the Nordics now. And there is associations like Nordic RSE, like UK RSE, the Society for Research Software Engineering, or US RSE. And these associations actually like help with this. They try to make it more public that like a lot of the research that is then published in papers relies on the code, and that it's an important part of the research, so that researchers also can get credit for that. And if that's something you're interested in, we will have a little bit about this also in the outro of the workshop on Thursday.
I don't know
Okay.
how hard should I disagree with someone who has written a comment in the notes? I mean, it's great that you write comments, and I don't want to, so I don't want to sound negative or anything, but I do want to comment. So because there
Go
is
ahead.
one comment that essentially says that you don't need to maintain papers, and so they are eternal, but you do need to maintain software. And like we kind of it does seem like that, but if you publish software and never maintain it, then it's just like a paper, right? Then it doesn't change anymore. And if when you publish the paper, it is frozen in time. I guess that is the difference that this is pointing at, right? So when you publish a paper, it's frozen in time, and there's nothing to maintain. When you publish a piece of software, people do have the expectation that you maintain it. But you can also like make it an archive and like, essentially freeze it, and then it doesn't run anymore. but it is this kind of the same thing as publishing an algorithm in a or in a paper. So like it's not worse than publishing a paper in that sense. Yeah, that was a kind of an interesting, different point of view. Just in a way, I feel about this so differently that it took me a while to understand what it's saying. But yeah,
it's good to read about the different points of views here. Yes, and thanks for your comment. Then let's move on to question 4. When you find a repository with code or library you would like to reuse, what are the things you look at to decide whether to use it? How is it for you, Jarno? What is the first thing that you're looking at?
Oh, the first thing is when was it last modified? If it's more than 2 years, then I might use it for inspiration, but I'm not going to use the code. Right? It's unlikely to work. The other thing is if it has a license file. I might not even look at what license it has as long as it has a license file. That's the start, right? Yeah, I mean, depends on how restricted. If I am already using other licenses in the same project, same software, then you need to make sure that they're compatible. But if you're just starting, just make sure that there's a license.
Sounds like you look at quite specific things already, which are maybe not the first things that come to mind for a researcher just looking at some
yeah,
code.
I mean, it's my
sounds
job.
like you have some experience with these things.
Yeah.
Like we have here also how easy it is to use, how fit for purpose it is for my project. Of course, those are also very important things. Like you don't even have to look at something if it doesn't seem to fit.
Yeah.
And one way of finding out how fit it is to read the README, read the documentation. And that is also mentioned as one of the points here. Is there documentation? Sometimes there might not be documentation. There is many projects out there where there's only code and then maybe some comments in the code. So that's also a good way of like where to first look. Does it have a README? Is there information on how do I actually get the computing environment up and running? And then also test if that actually works. Quick overview. Yes, that's what the READMEs are very good for. And the license. Yes, you also mentioned that already.
Yeah, it's good if so I guess the README is the third thing. And this is influenced a lot by what the GitHub user interface looks like. Like if you start from the top of the page, you first see how old the files are, and then you see if there's a license file, and then you see the README. So that's, I guess, one of the reasons I mentioned them in that order. But yeah, so if the README actually says that it is doing the thing that you wanted the software to do, then it's useful. Otherwise, yeah, of course, it might not be that useful.
Yeah. And that might also have influence on, I don't know, if your colleague has been using that code for many years and is happy with how it performs, and maybe even the README is not that extensive as you would like to have it, but you have someone there you can ask questions about. That could also be something to consider. And if you are thinking about building on top or contributing to the code that you find, then also like looking for something like a contribution guide could be good. Is there a code of conduct and how the violations to it will be handled? Are there any open pull requests, or have they been lingering for years? Because if you decide to put some time in contributing to a code, you also, of course, want someone to actually look at your suggestions and potentially merge them. Yeah. So yeah, That's a good list that you've been writing here. Do you have any other?
Like often even like seeing a pull request that is open means that someone else has used it and someone else has found it useful and it's clear enough code that they've been able to modify it, which already is a good indication. It's a positive indication, even if it has been open for a long time. If you look at some of the old codes that I mentioned that I have published, there will be no pull request. There will be no no changes in the code for a while, and you probably shouldn't use those. But yeah, yeah.
But you can still see if someone finds the paper and they're curious on how you implemented that, they can still see like how you did that because you shared the code. So in that sense, it's not useless out there.
No, it is not. It is not useless.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go back to the lesson material to the very bottom. Just one moment.
I have the tab open here.
Yes.
And are we in social coding?
Yeah, in the very bottom. Okay. So above this, you can find some more comments about also the questions that we have asked if you want to reread some of them. This last picture here shows also how our work in general as a researcher connects to the work of others. So we have our work here in the middle, and we are already looking at other people's stuff. We are looking at their ideas, the articles that they have published. We might reuse the data or the software that they have hopefully published. And we give them credit. We give them acknowledgement of that by citing them or mentioning in the acknowledgements or in what, depending on what you got from them, you might find different ways there. And then we want to make that also possible for others that may find our work. And that's really what this lesson is all about, on how we can all work together to like not have to always start from scratch. Okay, and software licenses are one part of that. And with that, I give over to Jarno.
Okay, so I just click next to get to the next section, which is software licensing. So yeah, this is essentially licenses are for telling people that they can use your code that you have shared and what they can use it for and under what conditions they can use it for. So at some point in the past, at least we had a version of this social coding section of the workshop that a social coding lesson that was called software licensing, but we decided to expand it a good bit. But this is still kind of something rather important that a lot of the infrastructure for cooperation is built around. So first, so the first point is copyright. So whenever you create something, you write a piece of code, you have copyright to that code. And there's a few different related concepts that people get mixed up. So copyright applies to creative work. It applies to text that you write, a painting that you make. I mean, if you're in the kitchen, because you use the kitchen metaphor, if you create a new recipe and write it down, that's it applies to the way you express the recipe, but it doesn't necessarily apply to the food itself or to the method of cooking it, right? So a trademark is a related concept, but it protects the brand name. So if you start a restaurant and give it a name, then that name would be a trademark. A patent is for technical inventions, so methods of doing things. I don't think algorithms can really be patented, but a specific application of an algorithm or a technical device, things like that, can be patented. And then there's copyright. So copyright is specifically for creative expression. So it's a bit I mean, there's a lot of these terms. It can be a bit complicated. And I guess the main point is not really to remember all the terms, right? The main point is to get the basic idea that there is copyright that or you have copyright to your code when you have written the code. And when someone else has written a piece of code, they have copyrighted that code. So if you just take someone else's code, well, that's not legal. Like you can't just take it and redistribute it to, or make copies of it and distribute it to other people. You need some sort of license. Copyright also controls derivative work, and this is kind of then this is the important concept here. So derivative work is using someone else's work and resampling it or creating something from it. But importantly, it needs to include something from the original work. So say this is copyright originally is a legal thing that has been applied to artwork, paintings and books and so on. So it's much easier maybe to apply there. So if you take, for example, a piece of music that someone else has created, and you speed it up or just remix parts of it and reorganize it somehow, that's derivative work. So you cannot automatically distribute that. That doesn't automatically become your work if you are directly using pieces of someone else's work. If you paint a painting that includes a painting, like you paint a picture of a room and there's a painting on the wall and that painting is the Mona Lisa that you painted into the painting, that's not derivative work, right? Does that make any sense? Hopefully it does. So yeah, if you're like remixing music is clearly derivative work. Copying a paragraph from someone else's book is not just derivative work, that's actually just direct copying. But quoting someone else is not derivative work. So that there is kind of a boundary there that is fluid in some way. Okay, so one important thing here is you can do almost anything to someone else's creative work when you have it in your possession, as long as you don't distribute it, as long as you don't publish it. So if it just stays in your home, then nobody cares. But if you publish it, or if you publish any derivative work that you've created based on it, then you need to think about licensing. Okay, so I don't know how much sense my examples made, so maybe we should actually go through the exercise. It's already in the notes. Let's see.
So what do you think, our audience, what do you think of these is derivative work? And now it goes towards like our actual coding experience and situations that you actually might be getting into. So we have download some code from a website and add onto it. Download some code and use one of the functions in your code. Changing code you got from somewhere. Extending code you got from somewhere. Completely rewriting code you got from somewhere. Rewriting to a different programming language. Linking to libraries, plugins, and drivers in your code. Clean room design. So somebody explains you the code, but you have never actually seen it. And the last one, you read a paper, understand the algorithm, and write your own code.
Yeah. So let's give people a moment. I'm also at the same time thinking through if there's any concept that's included in these examples, but I didn't mention. But I don't think so. So, well, we'll come back to it at the end. Is there anything you would like to comment while people read through this?
No, I think so. This linked also back to the very beginning when we find out that what we actually reused didn't have a license on it, so we would not be able to actually redistribute it. And here also it was still fine that we like reused their code and everything, but then when it comes to publishing, that's where we're getting into into the trouble.
Yeah. So
when
there's
there is
some
no license.
slightly complicated or a little bit complicated things about code in particular, where you don't necessarily always even need, oops, what did I do? You don't necessarily always need the code to run the program. So for example, if you write have you written Python libraries in this, or we've written requirements files? A code can depend, well, I mean, we just did the recipe for a container. So the container includes a lot of software. You have commands that install system libraries and install things like it installs an entire operating system, and then it installs entire programming languages and interpreters for those languages and so on. So that is not derivative work. When you just have a dependency and you include the instruction to install that dependency, that's not derivative work, right?
So
Then
similar to using NumPy in my Python script.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Just because I do import NumPy in my
Yeah.
Python script or import any library in any language script doesn't mean I need to care about the NumPy license.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go through this. So the first one, download some code from a website and add on to it. And I guess we're assuming that we are then publishing the code, or at least publishing something derived from the code, like scientific research results. So in that case, this is definitely derivative work. You're just taking someone else's code and use it and made some changes to it. We're just using it, not necessarily, but making changes to it and publishing those changes is derivative work. And download some code and use one of the functions in your code. I mean, I guess this depends on how you do it, actually. So if you copy the function and put it in your code, then it's definitely derivative work. If you call the function and put the name of the library into your requirements file or dependencies files, then it's not derivative work, right? So that actually depends. Well, okay, let's go on. Changing code you got from somewhere. What is this somewhere? Yeah, I mean, just changing the code again, not so much, but publishing the code, using it in research and publishing the research. Yeah, that is derivative work. Extending code you got from somewhere. So I guess this means adding a function to the code base. So yeah, I mean, this, I would say it's derivative work. I guess you could extend it by adding a function and then not publish the rest of it, but then it's a dependency. Okay, completely rewriting the code you got from somewhere. So completely rewriting, what does that mean? So the rest of the examples are kind of, well, there's some related examples. So completely rewriting code doesn't necessarily mean that it's free from copyright. So like the next one, rewriting code to a different programming language. So if you essentially do it line by line or function by function, you reproduce basically the same programming in a different language. That is derivative work. But then, well, the clean room design, H example. So someone describes you how the code works, and then you write it in a different language or even the same language, then it is not derivative work because you're just reproducing the algorithm. Then again, if they describe it to you in too much detail, like line by line, what does this line in the code do? You are actually pretty much getting to derivative work again. Okay, so that it depends on what level the rewrite is, but if you're just doing the same interface, but otherwise completely like doing it from scratch yourself, it's not derivative work. If you are rewriting it function by function, then it is derivative work. So I skipped over linking to library, static or dynamic plugins and drivers. So I said that having a dependency is not derivative work, but actually, if you are statically linking and then distributing the binary, that is derivative work, at least to some extent. Like there are licenses that specifically are about being able to link to it as a library or not being able to do that. So it does count as derivative work. But if it's a dynamic library, you're linking dynamically, then it is not derivative work. So yeah, I mean, it does get technical at this point. Okay, someone is saying I'm contradicting the solution, which is great. So yeah, so you read the paper, understand the algorithm, write your own code. So that is not derivative work. Yeah, so maybe I was giving a bit too much detail and I should actually look at the solutions just to see. So yeah, derivative work is A through F. Is derivative work, so that's pretty clear. Except I gave a lot, way too much details about situations where it might not be. Then G and I are derivative work, or not derivative work, that is. So statically
Yes.
linking to a library, I think it is, right? It is
And
considered derivative work.
sorry,
And E and F.
in general, it's also, and someone wrote it here also in the later comment in the notes, that it's somehow realistic that you get different answers on who you ask.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
maybe our questions or our statements here are also not clear enough to give this clear answer, because what you explained, like in this static versus dynamic libraries, and if you like share the binaries or the source code, that makes a difference. And that's why it's like important to like have a little bit of an overview now, so that when you are in this situation, you at least know where to look and know where you can find information about the different licenses, what they are actually like are talking about. But yeah, maybe for the future, we could look at making the statements less ambiguous, or then have a little bit more information in the solutions.
Yeah, or
But no, I
well,
think
I
your
mean, this
explanation
is
was good.
also these are more discussion points, I guess. I think like even having a solution there may not be. Maybe we should just make the solution more ambiguous.
Maybe it should not be called solution, but things
Yeah,
to note or
yeah,
take home
maybe. Yeah,
messages.
that's a good point. Okay, well, but yeah, so we also should not get bogged down in the details. In which case, I'm the wrong person to be doing this. But so the big picture is that you should always look for a license, and then you should basically do what other people do in the same situation, which is if you're using a Python library, you add it in the requirements file. You don't need to think about the license. People don't think about the license. If you're creating a container and you essentially have the entire Linux operating system in there, you still don't need to think about the license, and you never see people talking about the like Linux license in there. But then if you are actually taking code from someone else, even if you are rewriting it, you probably should think about the license. Like technically, there are situations where you don't have to, but it's still maybe better to just like take the license into account. So yeah, that should probably be the more big picture answer. So, and on a kind of related note, I already actually mentioned all of this. So, so on a related note, here's a big list of different licenses, and it's not really useful to know all of the possible licenses that exist, but there is a general sort of grouping of licenses. Starting from the bottom, there's public domain licenses. which basically say do whatever you want with my code, and you don't need to even mention where you got it. So this is what you include when you just like, I don't know, well when you don't care that much, basically, right? And then there's licenses with a bit more restrictions. So proprietary licenses are their own thing. We don't really have examples of them, but it essentially means you're not allowed to use it. It's a commercial thing, and somebody owns it. There might be some conditions where you actually can use it, and you have to kind of then go and understand what it is that they're doing. So
Or
if you're
you can
buying
buy the
something from
license.
someone else,
Yeah.
sorry?
Yeah, or you can buy licenses.
Yeah. So if you're buying something like a license to MATLAB, you are getting a proprietary license to use MATLAB, right? But then on the right, you have open source licenses, and there's the more permissive ones on the bottom. It's less conditions, but usually they're in the open source section. They do have the condition that you should tell people where you got the code or who did the work. So you should give attribution. So kind of like if you know CC BY for data, it essentially, so the by here means you need to have a sentence that says this was made by this person. Right? Essentially citing, essentially attribution. And then you can go all the way to strong copyleft, which means any derivative work has to be also open source. It has to be under an equally restrictive license. And here, because I mentioned the libraries, there is this library weak copyleft licenses where you can use the library, but you can't. So you can use the library in like a more permissive way, but so if you link to it, but then it's less permissive about using the code directly. So you don't need to know all of these, but there is this important thing that of where the arrows are pointing. So public domain you can use anywhere. This more permissive ones you can even use in proprietary codes, but you need to tell people where you got it from. And then the more you go to the copyleft side, the more restrictive it is. So you cannot always code down. You cannot use a more permissive license if you have included code from a less permissive one.
Yeah, and that's where it's important that you look at the license early on, because
Yeah.
the license of a code that you are using together with your own code might define which licenses you can actually use yourself for your own code also.
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention or show is this join up licensing assistant. I should not have closed the original page. Okay. Let's choose this one for now. So yeah, this is a tool created by, I think, European Union funding. It includes a big list of licenses and has a nice description of like you can quick at a glance see what you can do, what you must do, what you cannot do, and what it's compatible with. You can search for a specific license if you see it. So with MIT, you do a lot of things. You must include the copyright and tell people who made it, include license. You cannot hold the person liable for writing the code. It is compatible with almost anything. And well, interpretation of law is, I guess, something you need to look at if you are interested. And then it is supported well, so people understand what's going on if you use this license. And I guess this is an important point, by the way. So you should, in general, use a license that you didn't write yourself, a license that people know so that they understand what's going on. So if you write your own license, no matter how clear the legalese is, there's going to be a lawyer somewhere who thinks it's a too big a risk to use. So you should use a license that people already know. So MIT is a well-known license. There's GPL is a well-known license, and so on.
And this
Okay.
well-known license also, you might have encountered them in GitHub, for example. It shows it quite nicely then on the top what you can do and what you have to do with them.
Yeah. So this is helpful for choosing a license, especially when you already are using some work that is under a license. So we should soon move to a break. And
Yeah, I
then
think we
move
can
on.
have 5 minutes more here with the
Yeah.
licensing and then go to a break.
So we already mentioned the licensing assistant. So,
but when should I add a license?
Yeah, I think we already answered this question, but let's answer it again. So when you start a new project and you start working on some code, when do you add a license?
Well, nowadays, I do it as the very first thing. Either if it's myself only, I do that as the very first thing, or if it's together with others to discuss it also very early, like what kind of license we want to put that under, because then you don't have to think back or contact old collaborators that might not be working where they did before anymore, or like figure out the whole bureaucracy behind it. So you can start early on and have the terms clear.
So yeah, one important point is you can add a license even if the code is private. So adding a license doesn't make it public because you haven't put it anywhere, so necessarily publicly. So yeah, you can even start adding the license when the code is still like not published anywhere, when you're just working privately alone or with someone. But especially when there's a second person working on it, then the ownership becomes complicated. So if you then want to add a license, you need to ask everyone who has contributed to the code, unless you already have a license, and then the license tells you what you can do. So at least like add a license before you publish it, add a license before a second person works on the code. But preferably, I would just add it immediately. And
related to that, where do you add a license, or how? Like, how do you tell
yeah, I
people what's
mean,
the license of the code?
so the suggestion here is good. What I actually do is I add a single file called license.txt, but that works as long as you only have one license in the software. If you have a mix of licenses using things from multiple different sources, then it is a good idea to have a licenses folder in the root of your project directory, so your Git repository, and then you add the license files there. So it may still be just one file, or it may be a couple of files that apply to different parts of the code. So especially if you have code and you have data, you may need or may want to use different licenses for the code and the data, for example.
Yep. Okay, I think we should slowly move into the break, but there is, if you scroll down a bit, a very long list of a lot of great resources on the topic. So as you noticed, it is a topic where there can be like this different opinions about things depending on who you ask. It can completely change something if you change one word in the sentence, like how that relates to the licenses, or if it's derivative work or not. So if you're interested in the topic, look through here, and maybe you can find something that works for you. There's also multiple tools like the join up licensing assistant. But yeah, for the key point, I don't know, what should people take from this lesson?
Well, you should have a license for your software. Adding a license late can get complicated. It's good to have it as early as possible. If you're unsure, I would say to do what other people do. Ask your colleagues. What license should you use? And like if you actually have to make the decision, then look at the license selector and decide what you think is good.
Yep.
But yeah, in
And
general, like having any of these licenses is good.
yeah, remember that if you don't have a license, even if you put your code out there, the default is that no one can like make copies or build onto it, which is what science is about. So it's good to keep that in mind. And also, you might actually have an employer who tells you which license to use for your code. So you don't actually have to worry about it, because your employer might either in the contract or in some other papers tell you if you do code, always use this license. So also check that out. And now let's go into, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm just, your employer is also an owner of the code. So you always have two owners, actually. And you may have to ask them if things go on for too long without a license. So it's better, yeah, just to put it as have a license as early as possible.
And have that conversation early.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Have the conversation with everybody who's involved.
10 minutes break until 11 past the hour, and then we'll get back with software citation and a little bit about sharing data and then the feedback for today. See you in 10 minutes. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Okay, we are back from the break, and we have some 20 minutes left for today. And with this, we will go a little bit into software citation and sharing data. Jarno, could you switch the screen share to the software citation?
Yes. So this is the front page, and we are at the software citation section.
Exactly. So as you can see here on this big picture, we are also looking at the FAIR principles, and maybe you have heard about them already. FAIR stands here for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it comes across or researchers may stumble across it a lot when talking about data, but it also actually applies to software. And here in the beginning, we have the question, is putting software on GitHub or GitLab actually publishing? Does it actually help with making the code findable and accessible? And we have mentioned it's a very good step to do that. It's a very good step to publish your code on GitHub, to have everyone be able to find it. But what happens if GitHub is not around anymore in the future? Or what happens if someone decides to delete your code from there? Then there is no trace of it. There's nothing that you can link to. And therefore, it's also important to not only put it on GitHub, but once you're done or in one of the states of done with your code, for example, when you publish a paper that relates to the code, also publish the code and make it citable and persistent. And that means, for example, getting a persistent identifier, such a DOI, which you might also know from manuscripts, for your code. And services like Zenodo can give you that. And there's also multiple like national services that might provide you with a DOI for your code. And then we're also, if you scroll down a little bit, we're also talking about making your software citable. So we already talked about that software is on a bit different level than papers for the academic merit. But if you want people to cite it, you also need to make it possible for them to cite it. And one way of doing this is adding a so-called citation CFF file, which we can see here an example of. Nowadays, even GitHub supports this. So if you add a citation CFF file to your GitHub repository, it may already suggest like what kind of data should be in there. And it also, if a code has a citation CFF file, you can download, for example, the BibTeX citation for that code. And there's also a little bit further up, sorry, we're jumping around a little bit. There, yeah, the checklist for making a release of your software citable. And release here meaning we are in a state that this is now a done thing for now. It does not have to be like everything done, but it is something that you have used to create your research outputs, for example. It is in a
So,
state. Yeah.
so this is something like version 1.0, version 1.1, and so on, or zero
Yes,
point 0.1, or and so on.
exactly.
So it's
When
like,
you feel comfortable, it does what you want it to do in a certain way, and there might be still open issues, there might be still things you want to fix, but it's already usable. So what you can check is, we talked about license. So do you have a license assigned? Um, do you have some metadata for your software, for example, in a README or in the citation file format, for example? Do you have a clear version number? Like, you can start with 0.1, you can start with 1.0. Depends on what you want to say with that. And it might say also there are different things to different people. Are all the authors credited? Do you have all the contributors mentioned somewhere? Did you get a persistent identifier from tools like from services like Zenodo? And then also the last thing, add a recommended citation. So in this case, you also then have a little bit of this influence on how other people may cite your software, so that they don't have to worry, oh, I found this nice code here. They have a paper about it. They have the citation for, I don't know, the data set they used. But if you actually want people to cite your software, then it's good to give them the information that they need to do that properly. And in the very bottom of this document, there is also the information that if you cite other people, what kind of information is good to cite. And there is some resources also in the blue box. Have you cited any software, Jarno, in papers?
yeah. I mean, again, like, it's a part of the job. So if I'm participating in writing a paper, then it's probably related to some software that I wrote. But like in general, also before that, we would cite software, but there was no specific standard, and I don't think it was really counted anywhere, or like it was basically a link for people to find the software if it even was online at that point. But so yeah, this is a pretty high standard, but it is also a good to have this sort of checklist and like a recommended right way of doing it, so that yeah,
And
people
for
follow the same
us,
format. Yeah.
yeah, and for us as authors, it's fairly straightforward to write this file. If someone else would need to find and pick already, I don't know, sometimes the author's name might be hard to find. So like the easier you make it for people, the more likely it is that they actually cite your software. And yeah, I think like linking, like you mentioned, having a link to the web page of a tool or something is already a good first step. But yeah, the more you can put there also when citing other people's work, the better, the easier it is for those to find the right version that you also used, for example. Okay, then let's move on to sharing data.
Okay.
And we mentioned already in the beginning that we will not go too deep into this right now. This is more of a collection for you of places where you can share data. And some of them also integrate, for example, with GitHub and are also used for sharing code. So you can go through the list and see what either fits you. Sometimes you may want to keep it in the country that you are working in. Sometimes you may want to choose a more international forum, or sometimes there's also a domain-specific forum where the likelihood of someone randomly finding your data is higher because people that go there already are looking for something in your domain. So this is really something where you can then decide where you want to publish it. And a really good resource here is what's linked in the very top, this RE3 data. So there you can find a ginormous list of all kinds of forums. So we just picked a few here and put a few also national ones. And if we have people here who know about some forums, for example, in what do we don't have, Germany or other places, then please let us know so that we can add them here. Where do you usually publish your data, Jarno?
In Zenodo, basically. That's essentially the first option. Of course, it does have a size limit. So if you are in a domain where the amount of data is large, that doesn't work. But then, I guess the more domain specific, it is kind of the same as in publishing papers. The more general use it is, the more public you want to make it, and the more specialized it is to a field, the more you want to find a specific place for that field.
Yeah. And also here, it's important that you have a license attached to your data so that everyone knows under what terms they can reuse your data. There's also specific licenses for databases. And then there's also some information in the more towards the bottom of this page about licensing and AI. And there might be coming an update to this page very soon. So keep an eye on it. And then also in the further reading list, we put, again, we mentioned it many times
Trying to
already,
cite
the
someone
Turing
here.
way. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but the format is broken. Okay, sorry.
So the Turing way, there is a lot of resources there about everything that we talked about today in both lessons, and then also multiple papers and guidelines for fair software and data as well as, for example, a software quality checklist. And with that, I think we can take a look at the notes. I didn't see now any questions.
No questions. So there is the feedback section then.
Exactly. We leave some time now for you to provide feedback about today, both sessions or whichever session you attended. Was it too fast, too slow, too advanced, too basic? Do you think you will use what you learned today? Were there things that you really liked? Were there things that we should definitely work on a little bit more before we do the next iteration of this workshop? And if you have any other feedback, we are very happy to hear about this, because we will continue these workshops and we always thrive to improve or try to improve based on your feedback. So this is very important for us. And you can also continue asking questions in the very bottom. With that.
So
yeah,
I don't have anything more to bring up. Anything else? Or I'll just keep an eye on any more questions for a few minutes.
Yeah, and now I was so worried about not having the time for the feedback that we are now done 5 minutes earlier, but I guess that is okay. Sorry for running through the software citation part, but also that is something like check out this citation CFF file, for example, and see how it can be used, especially within GitHub. And when guess you were also a researcher before you became a research software engineer. Were the topics of today, were they something that you have thought about in your daily life?
I mean, as a researcher?
Yeah, as a researcher.
So they did come up for kind of standard reasons. I mean, it was a while ago, and like I mentioned, like sharing the code was not normal when I started. So there was this standard argument that if you share your code, then the other people will use it to produce the results before you get there, which was because I was also in a field that, well, I mean, I was doing high performance computing on really big clusters. So it was like after the fact that now that I think about it, it seems like a weird argument because there were like 3 people in the world who had the resources to run that experiment, and they had other things to do. So it wasn't really a great argument, but you know that was the world then. Um, so there were situations where either the code changed or just the machine changed and it didn't reproduce exactly the same results as before. And due to the nature of statistics works, sometimes you wouldn't get quite the same headline results, right? So like I was thinking about this a few times, and in the end, we did start publishing the code. But at that point, I had already essentially left the field and became a research software engineer. So like I was happy to see people publish the codes that I had worked on, but yeah, it never happened while I was working on them. Um, I don't think software citations ever came up. Like we didn't. So we did cite software in the sense of giving a link in the citation section of the paper, but it wasn't for credit, it was for convenience. So yeah, I mean, things have changed quite a bit since then, or at least I have the impression that they have. Although it's been, what has it been, like 8 years since I was a proper researcher. Um, I say proper researcher because I have had a researcher title since then, but um, I wasn't actually a researcher. I was actually, I guess, a software engineer for the research team. But yeah,
Okay.
so I mean, yeah, these are like this. These would have prevented several issues, and I have like I think a few disagreements between research teams would have been solved if they had published their codes.
Mm.
Like we would have known why the results are different. Um, because it seems like they were just doing different things and thinking they were doing the same things. So yeah, stuff like that. It was not just reproducibility, but just actually like interpretability of the results can depend on actually publishing the code.
Mm. I don't know, can you scroll down the notes to the
Yes.
feedback section? So we have people filling in there. Thank you very much. Please keep it coming. Seems overall we had the right speed, a little bit too fast, maybe right level. People will use what they learned today. Licensing discussion. Oh, glad that you also got something out from the Snake Make episode. Yeah, please also check all the exercises that we have there. We try to put always the solutions there so that you can run through them by yourself. And then we have the bring your own code sessions for asking more questions about these things. And sorry to hear that sometimes the audio did not go through very well. And the Python, yes, it's been difficult to follow as a non-Python user. That's something also we're still trying to figure out. I think it has gotten better over the years, but by adding, at least for self-learning, the different tabs of the different languages, and you will see more of them also during the next days. But Python is still our go-to example language for many things, but it's understandable that now that we are only demoing the examples, and that as a non-Python user, it might take a bit longer to get behind what's actually happening. Sorry for that. But yeah, we're over the time already. So maybe we wrap up here. We'll still leave the notes open for you to add more feedback. I'll say thank you, Jarno, for teaching today. And we'll see everyone else tomorrow again. What comes up tomorrow? It is Jupyter and documentation lesson. And I think you are part of the teaching.
Yeah, I will be there
tomorrow
in the
as well.
afternoon.
Yes. Okay. So bye for me for now.
Yeah.
I think I'll be back on Thursday afternoon.
Okay.
And Jarno will be back tomorrow.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.